Welcome to the Corporate Venturing Insider Series, where I interview top practitioners in the CVC world and learn with you the best practices and golden nuggets that they have accumulated over their career. In this episode, we will be learning from Jacqueline LeSage of Munich RE Ventures. Jacqueline, could you take a few minutes to share your story and how you got to where you are today?
Thank you. And thank you, Nicholas, for hosting this. Having watched a few of them now to prepare, I so wish that when I had gotten going doing CVC, that something like this had existed because the learnings are huge. So Nicholas wants me to start talking about the career path and a little bit about who am I. And I think the main thing to know about the career path is this was no direct career path. I certainly knew nothing of venture capital when I was growing up in rural Midwestern United States. Never had heard of it. But I did hear somehow about investment banking. And it was also a period of renewed globalization. And that really influenced the early phases of my career. So during my higher education years around college and business school, I got a lot of experience around infrastructure, particularly for telecom and transportation, project finance, spent a number of years living in China, and getting exposure to the capital markets intersections with all of those. So in the late 1990s, I chose to go to a very different space, and I left consulting. I got very interested in a version of interactivity around clickable video. And so I moved to Silicon Valley from Hong Kong, and I really had no idea what was going on here in the 1990s and arrived a little unprepared for the dot-com bubble. But I found a co-founder, and we had relevant image processing expertise and patents. And so we got it going. And it was very exciting. But ultimately, we learned one of the classic lessons of venture, which is timing is everything. And we were just too early. And interestingly, a few years later, one of the prominent VCs that was engaged with us as the dot-com bubble was bursting came back and said, hey, why don't we get the band together? You'll restart the company, we'll fund that, and then we'll guarantee funding your Series A. And another interesting lesson in timing, because neither my co-founder nor I were still passionate about that at that time. So we didn't do that. But the experience was phenomenal because I got the whole experience around having a startup and raising money. What's the funding arc? What are the deal terms? How do you engage with VCs? How do you engage with your board? How do you deal with hiring and firing and just everything around that venture process, which obviously has become super important nowadays. Then I had my daughter, and not long after that, a good friend of mine, Beth, from undergrad, she reached out to me. And we knew each other really well, both personally and professionally. We were friends in college. We co-ran a business-oriented student group. And when I went on to consulting, I recruited her to the same firm. She was a year after me, and now she was still there. And so she reached out to me and she said, hey, I don't know if you're looking for a job, interested in insurance, or willing to move to Hartford, Connecticut from San Francisco, but I know something that would be a great fit for you. And so my answer was no, but when someone who knows you so well thinks they found a fit for you, you must honor that and look at it. At the Hartford, we were one of the first primary carriers to set up a direct corporate venture capital investing capability, and this was long before InsurTech was a thing. And then we also had an innovation capability where we would take new offerings from just an idea and launch it out into the market. So we were pretty early for doing that sort of thing in insurance, but it was very foundational for being able to set up a venture group and set up innovation at that time. It was a much smaller community of corporate VCs, but everybody was very tight and you could learn so much from each other, and it was wonderful. And we had a number of successes, made a number of investments, and launched some products into market. But then the 2008-2009 financial crisis hit, and that was really challenging for the company. And ultimately, they ceased all of these sorts of activities. And so I left. And so at that point, I joined Jump Associates, which at this point is a 25-year-old boutique consulting firm focused on corporate innovation. And I joined them to advise companies on how to set up innovation capabilities, as well as corporate VCs. But I really missed doing it. And I really especially missed the corporate VC side. So while I was there, A good friend of mine from when I was doing VC at the Hartford, he was now a management consultant, and he was advising Hartford Steam Boiler, a subsidiary of Munich RE, on setting up the first corporate venture capital group within Munich RE. I was really excited about that opportunity. The HSB part got into areas of insurance that I liked more because they were commercial and around industrial IoT and around the built environment. And then there was Munich RE behind that, and there was zero contact and zero promise there would ever be anything with Munich RE if I joined and led this small venture team for Hartford Steam Boiler. But knowing what I knew about insurance and knowing the way that Munich RE is behind everything, whether it's supporting the world with natural catastrophes, supporting innovation when humans go into space, I had known coming out of the Hartford that if I did CVC again, I really would want to do it at a reinsurance company. So when Hartford Steam Boiler turned around and said, thanks for being a thought partner for us as we get this set up, now that we've got it approved, would you be interested in running it? I jumped at the chance. I took the role, and it was super exciting. So that's kind of how I got to where I am. I can go now into what is reinsurance and what is Munich RE Ventures.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful because then there would be questions about how do you define your investment thesis around this.
So let's start with what is reinsurance and even what is primary insurance. So primary insurance is the insurance that you buy as an individual at your homeowner's insurance, your auto insurance, or if you set up a business, your business insurance. So they're taking the primary risk. A reinsurer, and particularly Munich RE, plays in two different ways. So one is they're there standing behind those normal insurance products that you're familiar with, taking on the risk above which the primary carrier wants to take. So you can think about it like a backstop, where they only take certain risks, but when things get too big for the primary carrier to handle, it goes on to the reinsurer. And so a lot of times that's around when bad stuff happens, that reinsurer is there and covers it. There's another thing that reinsurers, and particularly Munich RE, do. That's about ensuring what I think about as human innovation and invention.
One question, which is more on the personal side, is the fact you actually had experience working in a different continent. How much of that do you think shaped your career?
I think that it has to be hugely impactful. But the impactful moment is the impactful thing, the fact that I wanted to do that and sought that out, and that meant something about who I was as a person and what I liked. Because I didn't just get put there. I told my consulting firm, I've moved out of my apartment and put my stuff in storage, and I'm moving to Hong Kong in 2 months with or without you. Do you have something I could do? I was going no matter what. And so I think there's something about the desire to do that gameness and willing to just land somewhere and know nothing that is defining.
And of course, when we invest as corporate VCs or VCs, you want to invest just a bit too early, because if it's becoming obvious, then you pay the normal price for everyone. If you're too late, then that's really not good. How much of that experience of being too early sometimes create a bias where you're maybe a bit too cautious, or actually you're aware of the value of it?
I haven't found that it's leading to be too cautious, because I tend to have a view that some things are already a little done. But there still ends up being a category of things sometimes where it really is just where it's too early, or where it might be too early, but that just means you have to go about the market a certain way and be ready for it. Maybe thinking extrovertedly here, maybe that's more of the impact that it has is on that, and understanding what needs to be true for it to not be too early.
How early do you invest?
So Munich RE Ventures invests from seed to Series D. So we've been the first money into a company at the time that it's incorporating, and we've led a Series D. I think we prefer A and B and a little bit of seed, but we've done the whole gamut.
Very nice. And then going back to this entrepreneur's experience, as an investor, How do you think it is impacting the way you engage, review, assess, support?
Having been an entrepreneur gives me a lot of empathy for the role. And it's a really tough role to be a founder. And so I think that a way in which having been an entrepreneur influences how I act as an investor and a board member. But then there's also the things that I learned more tactically from being an entrepreneur that I start matching around. But in terms of the things around, when you're on a board, you have certain expertise that you bring. You also have certain things that they're your set of issues that you tend to like to look at, and the lens through which you look at a company, and you repeat that a little bit. But a full board is a bunch of people all doing that. And each founder is going to be different. Some are brand new, some are experienced. You have different levels of skills and interests of the other board members.
Can you explain what kind of best practices the audience can learn about really helping the CEO outside the board?
Yeah, and it's not like I want to become the confidant for every one of them. It's more like they're going to need a confidant. And if I'm able to be that, that's great. And a lot of times they go to different board members for different reasons. I saw from my board member, one in particular, when I had my startup, how critical that role was. As a board member, you're spending a lot of time in board meetings, but you're also spending a lot of time outside of that, and you're building up your personal relationship, and you're talking about the company. And at least for me, I want to make it so that if those sessions can be really helpful as well, then that's great, because I'm available in between board meetings. And I think all board members should be.
I'm sure in your team, you also have non-entrepreneurs in your team. How do you recruit and how do you coach your teams to have this empathy with entrepreneurs?
To some extent, I think anyone who's on my team, an investment director, and so they've been doing this for 15 years or 20 years, hopefully even though they haven't been a founder, they've built up empathy.
Makes sense. Now, one thing that's very unique in your profile from the others we have interviewed so far is you were in a CVC, you had the experience of one, and then you designed the new one. Can you tell the audience what you learned from your first experience that was really valuable to design the second one?
I learned so much in the first one, and some of the things I actually got to change while I was there. And then interestingly, for the second one, I didn't necessarily get to change all the things I might have wanted to up front, and it does make it harder. But everyone always talks about how important it is to be, as a CVC, really connected up to the CEO. And I think obviously that's true. It's necessary. It's not sufficient. I think it's super important to have a strong base of supporters and true believers in the next 1 and 2 levels down. People who, if you were taken away, it would impact their business and they would fight for you. You're part of their success. I think that's really important, is to have a much broader support. And I think some corporate VCs can focus only on that CEO, and it creates a lot more risk for them, because what's the average life of a CEO these days in role? We have hard enough time as CVCs having longevity. We don't need to tie it 100% to the CEO's longevity also. So I think that's one. The second one was the importance of having experienced VCs with a network, knowing how to play the game, knowing how to develop and maintain a reputation, getting access to deals, et cetera. The third one, which has been the most critical, is around strategic value. So we're corporate VCs, strategic value first. Strategic value is hard, and there's many different models of doing corporate VC that are all strategic, but go about getting that strategic value differently.
There are so many golden nuggets. So do you have this proactivity even before you invest in the startup, where these teams start thinking about what could be the proof of concept and the synergies? And how do they then get KPIs to make sure they execute on what they had identified?
In that set of lessons learned around having this sort of capability that I learned from the first one included having well-developed themes, or you can think of it as a thesis that's developed up front and is agreed upon with some part of your company. It could be with the CEO, it could be with the businesses. And that thesis can be really far out in a horizon, or unfortunately, sometimes it can be really near term. But the point is that you have pre-established sectors that are of importance, why they might be important, and sort of the so what. And then the people that you're doing it with on the business side are going to be the people that you engage with when you're looking at a startup, and ultimately, if you invest in a startup, to help add value to that startup and value to the parent. I call it the pre-plugging of everything up front is critical. And that includes because it creates great relationships between our investment team and the businesses. I think where it can get problematic is if the actual engagement that's desired is too prescribed or too near term. That can be problematic, but that's not a problem of having a pre-thought out thesis. That's a problem of having a thesis that's too near term, which I would discourage. But definitely having that thought up front is key to strategic value. Otherwise, you're just investing. And then you go around knocking on doors once you've invested saying, hey, look at my pretty thing. Do you want it? That's going to have less chance of a success than when you already have a business or businesses that are excited about you going after that space and want to see the companies that you're going to be bringing.
Yeah. And I think that's where this team really needs to be well connected to the mothership. They need to understand what they care about. How do you ensure startups still get value from a POC, even if it doesn't turn into a commercial agreement?
There's a general answer, which is anytime something doesn't work out, there's negative lessons. POCs not working out have different reasons for why they happen. But hopefully it doesn't happen because the corporate just didn't do it. Well, that's one kind of negative lesson. It happens, but it gives the startups and the corporate learning about why that particular thing doesn't work. Then that's really valuable. And so that just gets to the basic lesson of failures aren't always things to just be discarded. You got to learn from your failures. And so if you've got a proof of concept that doesn't work out, both the corporate and the startup should be looking at what that means, because it probably means something for what's the thing to do next, or how to change the business on the corporate side, or how to change something that the startup's doing. There's so many lessons in something not working out.
Yeah, I think when you say negative lessons, you mean negative outcome lessons, which is always valuable.
Exactly.
So talking of failure, we had another question. Can you underwrite risk of startup failure as an insurance investor?
Nice question. So interestingly enough, we have been asked that by at least one VC firm that you would know the name of. And my cheeky answer is always, one, there's a price for everything. Second thing, which is, you're telling me that you want us to take all your risk out of your business, but then why do you get your reward? It was a little bit of a topic when there became so many unicorns and you started having situations where you were well beyond where the traditional VC funds might want to be. And the rounds were getting bigger and bigger, but they weren't exiting. And we did start hearing some interesting cheeky requests about whether that was something we would do.
Makes sense. So back to the 3 golden nuggets. The second one is about strategic value. And here, every CVCs, I believe, are struggling with quantifying and exposing or making it very clear what is a strategic value. What's the learnings that you had through these 2 CVCs in making sure the strategic value is well understood and appreciated from the mothership?
If I had a perfect answer to that, would be wonderful. It's hard, and it always remains hard. We end up keeping track of a lot of things. So I'll tell you what we keep track of, and we report out quarterly. So with every investment, there's some kind of plan for what's going to happen. And sometimes there's a commercial agreement, and sometimes it's way further out. But whatever that plan is, and the engagement and interaction that's supposed to happen, we set that out. We have some milestones. And so we're constantly tracking to did we do what we said we were going to do from a process standpoint? And is the business following up in all of that? We've had a couple situations where Munich RE and Hartford Steam Boiler have bought companies that either were in our portfolio or that we sourced. And the big balance sheet ended up making a very significant investment after we were in the A and B. And I think those are, no question, big strategic wins. But it's still not something I have an easy answer to.
I really appreciate your candid answer. I think you're right. If it was easy or there was a best practice that's obvious to follow, everyone would say it, but it's not. The third golden nugget you mentioned was making sure you are part of the success and not just of the CEO, because you still need to survive a CEO change. Any tip for the audience about how to make sure that you're being part of versus just on the side?
Mm-hmm. I think what I described about the themes and pre-plugging the themes is a great way to do that, because it really gets you also involved in the strategy of the business, et cetera. So that by nature does that. And that does it 2 levels down sort of thing. The other thing for us, which I'm not sure I would recommend, is we actually have 3 funds. So we started off with $50 million for Hartford Steam Boiler, just investing from their balance sheet. But if you flash forward to today, we have 3 funds, and now they're set up like funds, each with a different limited partner that's a business. So Hartford Steam Boiler still has its fund. Ergo, which is a primary carrier owned by Munich RE, has its own fund. And then the reinsurance group has its fund. And we've more than 10x the fund dollars or fund equivalent. And each of those 3 funds has a different investment committee, with me being the only common across it. And those investment committees have the most senior people of those businesses.
Do you think it's a good practice, not a good practice, a best practice to have someone from the business being on the board of a startup you invest in?
We tend to keep a pretty bright line there because of the liability issues. And also, whenever we're investing in a company, and particularly if it's a really competitive one with really strong investors, it's hard enough to try to get our experienced VC and CVC folks to be in the room and on the board. And like anyone, you've got to show their reputation. And then, as we know, once you're in that boardroom, a lot of the stuff that you're dealing with isn't necessarily the stuff that the BU would be wanting to deal with the startup. You're dealing with HR issues, you're dealing with the next funding round, you're dealing with questions around an exit, all sorts of different stuff.
How many people are involved in the investment approval or validation process before it even go back to the IC?
It could be a couple people from my team and just 1 or 2 people on the business side. It really depends on the theme. I think if what they're getting at most likely is, aren't you guys really slow? And the thing is, when we've got a theme that's pre-plugged, and when what we're doing is looking at something that's in a theme, we can go really fast. So in that situation, we can go in 3 weeks or 4 weeks.
Very nice. So I left the most inspiring questions for last. We're in the last 5 minutes. First, what's your biggest challenge today? And what do you think you can do to push the boundary?
So my biggest challenge today is that when I got started with Hartford Steam Boiler and negotiated around what this corporate VC would look like. Subsequently, we expanded 10x in dollars and added 2 new funds. And there wasn't the same ability to determine upfront what we were going to be. And so what that means is we're always evolving our platform rather than having it set up upfront and then running with it. Now, as we know, CVCs are always evolving, or they evolve every few years, but we're always in transition. And so I would like to have had the ability to set the whole thing up front. But to be honest, I don't know that we could have done that at the time for a number of reasons, but I would like to be at a point where we're just more stable for a period of time. But that's my biggest challenge, is the constant evolution of the program.
And I think that's true for every CVC that want to keep doing better and better. So the last question is really for the audience who are thinking about going into corporate venturing or just getting started. What do you think are the key elements in establishing a team of successful CVC investors?
Having experienced VC people, CVC or VC, but you probably need people who have had both experiences. So having people that fill the CVC and the VC. And that, I think, is number one, is picking people who know how to do venture and know how to engage with a corporation. That really is super duper important. And then I think the apprenticeship model is very important because you want to be able to advance people in their careers, and you only learn in this business from experiencing it.
Jacqueline, I want to thank you. You gave a lot of insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Good luck with the rest of the series. Bye-bye.